I went to SHOT Show this year, and I'm going to tell you what it's like for a regular person to go to SHOT Show. Somebody who's not a celebrity, because everything you see from SHOT Show on Instagram, YouTube, all of those are coming from these huge media influencers, and that's not the real experience of going to SHOT Show. So this video is going to talk about what the convention, what the trade show is like for a regular person. So this video is going to not really be a review of any of the specific exhibitors at SHOT Show. It's going to be more of an overview of the convention itself. If you want to see videos that are talking about all of the different manufacturers and what their new things are at SHOT Show, go check out TFB TV Showtime. They have a bunch of good videos talking about specific manufacturers. Here's a link up in the cards. I hope that's the right direction to point. But we're going to be talking more about what the convention is, demystifying the convention. So let's first talk about how the convention was sort of organized and give you sort of an overview of what the map was. So there are two sides of SHOT Show. There's the Venetian and there is Caesar's Forum. And Caesar's Forum had two sections to it. There was sort of a smaller manufacturer section and then a larger manufacturer section. And they also had something called the Archery Business Pavilion. So this was a giant showroom dedicated only to archery businesses. So on the bigger business side of Caesar's Forum, they had a bunch of like bigger manufacturers for firearms, and they had a couple of apparel manufacturers over there as well. So they had like Daniel Defense was over there. They had Timney Triggers and Amend 2 magazines were also over there. And then on the smaller businesses side of the Caesar's Forum, they had things like Flux, Antimatter Industries, Stake Staff Systems. They had a couple of armor manufacturers, some airsoft manufacturers, and then the Archery Pavilion, which was a new thing for this year from my understanding. And that was an entire section dedicated to archery and archery bow hunting. Once you get to the end of the Caesar's Forum, you come to this giant bridge that sort of connects the Venetian and Caesar's Forum together. And you cross that bridge and you get over to the Venetian, which the Venetian was where most of the business was happening. The Caesar's Forum was kind of, I only really found myself over there when I was looking for specific manufacturers. So the Venetian had 5 floors of expo halls that were dedicated to SHOT Show. And starting from the floor and working our way down, the floor was the suppliers showcase. And what this was all of the material suppliers and manufacturers that were on the supply side of the industry looking for companies to collaborate with manufacturing or selling their supplies to be manufactured. So things like Brookwood, Cordura, and then a bunch of like metallurgists. That's what you would expect to see up there. Brookwood and Cordura are both fabric manufacturers. Moving down to the 4th floor, this is where they had a bunch of meeting rooms. So if you needed to do like behind closed doors meetings and like C-suite meetings, they had that available for you. And then they also had a media room up there. So this floor was largely closed off. They had like an escalator track that if you went up the escalator track and tried to go onto the 4th floor, there was like a desk where they would scan your badge before you could go, into any of the rooms on the 4th floor. On the 3rd floor, this one was SHOT Show University. So these were forums and speakers talking about like how to run your business more effectively, how to manage finances for a firearms related business, and how to be in absolute compliance with the ATF when it comes to things like a 4473. So that floor was largely just convention halls dedicated to those specific purposes. Once you got down to the 2nd floor, this is where all of the big manufacturers were. So you're talking about Beretta, Walther, Geisley, Colt. All of these manufacturers were on the 2nd floor of the Venetian. And then as you work your way through the Venetian second floor, they had another dedicated area for military law enforcement buyers. So these are all of the manufacturers that were catering towards those markets. So you're looking at like Terex, their Leaf guys were over there. Massif, they were over there. You had like Springfield Arms Police Collection. All of those guys were on that side of the manufacturing hall. You got out onto the main floor, and that's where all of the big manufacturers that were selling to civilians were located at. So Hollow Sun, anything like that, Night Force, all of those guys were out on the main floor of the Venetian. And then if you go down the stairs, you get into what's kind of called the dungeon, and this is where all of the smaller manufacturers are located. So you're thinking like Slip 2000, the lube manufacturer, Schmid Triggers were down there. Basically, if they're a smaller manufacturer, they're on that floor. And this is like 10 rows of booths. So there was a ton of area to cover on that first floor of the Venetian. Another thing that they had on that first floor of the Venetian was the new product center. And I don't have any video from this area because cameras weren't allowed. But this is basically where all of the things that were being announced at SHOT Show were sort of on display in like glass cases. So you couldn't necessarily look at them, with your hands. You couldn't touch and feel and test the products at all, but you could see, okay, this is what's new this year. So this is the booth that I should go to look at this new product. So now that you've kind of got a roundabout overview of what the convention center is like, let's talk about what I did and the sort of flow of the convention for me. So my first day was a travel day. I left my hometown in Salt Lake at about 4 o'clock in the morning and got to my hotel at about 10 in the morning. So that was 5.5 hours of driving, which is pretty rough. But so I arrived at my hotel, which is one of the venue's sponsored hotels, and we were staying at Circus, which I don't know. I'm going to put up some B-roll that I filmed of Circus right here. But I don't think I've ever felt more like I was going to get murdered at a hotel than I felt while I was at Circus. And there was like some black stuff on the floor. I don't know if it was blood or like it was a black stain on the floor. So yeah, that was kind of sketchy as fuck. But I only really slept in the hotel. I didn't really spend a whole lot of time outside of sleeping at the hotel, so I wasn't that stressed out about it. The more frustrating thing about it was that when we got the room through SHOT Show's website, they advertised it as $44 for the room, and when we got there, they ended up charging $89 for the room, which was almost a 200% increase of the price. And they said it was just additional fees. It was kind of one of the worst parts was staying at Circus. One of my friends who was at SHOT Show, she's a competitive shooter. She actually said, "You're staying at Circus. That's an hourly hotel." And yeah, I can see why she'd say that. This is my first time in Vegas ever, so it was kind of an amateur mistake, I guess. But I figured since it was one of the hotels on the official, like, recommended hotel list, it would be a little bit nicer than it actually turned out to be. What my morning looked like was I'd wake up at about 6 o'clock in the morning, go to, get ready, go to the monorail, ride the monorail down to the Venetian, and I would get in right as the doors were opening at 8:30 every morning. So I did that on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Those 3 days I went and did that. Luckily enough, all of the hotels and casinos down there have a Starbucks in them, so you can grab a Starbucks on your way. The first 2 days that I was there were for work, so I didn't do a whole lot of fun looking around stuff. I was pretty dedicated to just going straight to manufacturers and pattern makers and talking to them about my designs. So there wasn't a whole lot of in-between time on those first 2 days. But one of the things that immediately stuck out to me about the convention layout was that booths were seemingly set next to each other in a nonsensical, or I couldn't make sense of it, fashion. So as you're kind of walking the floor, you can find all kinds of different manufacturers. And that's really what I did, was just kind of go from row to row looking for apparel manufacturers that first 2 days. The third day was when I kind of set it aside for my fun day, which I walked the floors and just kind of stopped at whatever was interesting to me or companies that I knew. PSA really knocked it out of the park at this SHOT Show. I mean, PSA and Holosun kind of kill it at every SHOT Show, but this one was like just a blowout of their two booths. They were constantly booked all the way through. Like, there was people all covering every square inch of floor at both of their booths. So PSA and Holosun, really interesting offerings. PSA had all of their new prototypes on show, like the Alclan and the MP7, and Holosun had their thermals again, which the pistol thermal, at least to me, seems like it's like 3 or 4 years out until it's ready for production. And the rifle thermal seems like it's probably 2 years out. But they say they're going to release it this year. Based on what I saw at the show, I don't know if it's going to be ready for like duty use after another 6 months or so, but I guess we'll see. So on that Thursday morning, I was just kind of bumming around, and I knew that one of my friends was going to be working the Walther booth at about 10:30. So I was going to head over there, but I was a little bit early. So while I was bumming time, I was just checking Twitter on my phone, or X, I guess, and Instagram stories to see if there was anything cool at the show that I should make sure to check out while I was there. And as it turns out, TFB and Blue Force Gear were doing a giveaway for this sling. And this is a 1 of 500 of the Tiger Stripe Blue Force Gear sling that I happened to get. I was expecting it to be like a patch or something for the giveaway, but I went over to their booth and won the sling. And later in the day, I happened to see James Reeves at the Geisley booth, and he gave me this patch. And while I was talking with him, I'm like, "Hey man, I got the sling. I just wanted to say thank you." And while we were chatting, he's like, "Are you a patch guy?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm a patch guy." He's like, "Good. Well, I've got these special edition patches. They're super limited, so I don't want to give them to anybody who's not a patch guy. So are you bullshitting me?" I'm like, "No, I'm definitely not bullshitting you. I've got like a patch wall. Like, I can show you a picture of my patch wall." And he's like, all right, I believe you. So, he was really cool. And all of the celebrities that I just happened to run into were really cool there. People like Nut and Fancy, Matt Carricker I happened to run into as well, and then USA Airsoft. All of these guys, links up here to their channels. All of these guys were really cool when I ran into them. And, I think if you wait in line to see a celebrity that's kind of cringe, it's not really any better than like a Funko Pop, right? Like those types of soy people. But I just happened to run into these guys on the expo floor and was like, "Hey, love your stuff." So that was really cool. That was one of the cool aspects about SHOT Show, is just happening to run into these guys that are like mega celebrities in the gun industry. But I can take that or leave it. Celebrity worship is cringe. So now, as you're watching all of the SHOT Show content that you're going to see online, the big thing that always stuck out to me before I went to SHOT Show was like how you're getting to look at all of these fancy, new and interesting pieces of firearms technology before they're released to the public. And while that is true, you do get to look at them and get hands-on with them. You're not actually getting hands-on with them because it's not like you can shoot anything unless you go to the media day, which is by invitation only, right? So unless you go to the range day on Monday, there's not a whole lot that you can do, review-wise, or there's not a whole lot you can learn about these individual products aside from dry firing, but the only thing you really gain from dry firing is how is the trigger in this new firearm. And a lot of the firearms there are using Geisley triggers in them, so they all feel kind of the same. Or they'll use like a Schmid 2-stage in them, so they all feel kind of the same when it comes to triggers. When you're talking about new firearms completely, something like the Auckland or some of the other bullpup offerings that were there, that's where the dry firing is really beneficial. But outside of that, there's not a whole lot that you can learn about these new products that you can't learn just as well from one of the TFB TV Showtime videos. One of the things that, if you're just a regular guy, is beneficial about going to SHOT Show, or is really cool about going to SHOT Show, is that there's a lot of giveaways at these different booths. So like I said earlier, I got that Blue Force gear sling. I got a braided buffer spring from Sure Cycle as well, and then a whole bunch of like patches, tester lube from Slip 2000. So you can get a lot of like free little tchotchkes and like tester stuff for lubricants, and if you do the giveaways, you can have a chance to get some of the free stuff. Patches and stickers are the really cool things that you can get from a lot of these different companies. So if you're like a patch guy or a sticker guy, you're going to be in heaven at SHOT Show. But if you're not, then there's not a whole lot for you to take away from SHOT Show if you're not in the industry, right? And when I say in the industry, what I mean is you're acting as a buyer or seller for a company, or you're acting as a buyer or seller for a military or police organization. Because in that case, these connections can be really beneficial. Meeting the people, the sales reps at these different booths, and them being able to tell you, well, here you have an organization with 50 people in it. Here's the discount that I can give you for your military and company rate. Establishing pro sales, that type of thing is really beneficial, but you can't buy anything at SHOT Show, right? So your average person that doesn't own a company, isn't in the firearms industry, isn't really going to benefit. So one of the things that you always hear from like Instagram stories, YouTube, and from podcasts from people in the firearms industry is that SHOT Show always has all kinds of crazy parties. And I'm here to kind of dispel that. There is SHOT Show After Dark, which is an official sort of networking event series put on by the organization, by the NSSF, but those are kind of small scale industry events where you go to a club or something. And I'm not a huge clubber myself, so it was kind of a, hey, I'm gonna walk in to see what it's like, and then there's not a whole lot here for me, and walk out, right? The big industry parties that you always hear about, like the 511 party and the Cry party, those are all invite only. So unless you know somebody in the industry or are on the guest list, you're not going to be getting into those parties. And even I know people in the firearms industry, like I'm internet friends with some of the influencers and people in the industry, but I'm not going to invite myself to tag along as their guest to these parties. That's kind of cringe. I don't know, it feels like coattail hopping, So that's kind of one of the things that you have to think about, what you're going to SHOT Show for. If you're going because you own a company and you want to make these business connections, then I think that's a good reason to go to SHOT Show. If you're going because you hear all of these stories about, hey, there's all kinds of parties and it's a ton of fun and you're going to, with all of these industry friends, that's not really going to be the expectation for somebody who's going to SHOT Show for their first time. And if you're going to see all of the new things that are at SHOT Show, you can kind of get a better understanding of the new things that are at SHOT Show from watching TFB TV Showtime or like Classic Firearms, because they're going to give a more informed approach to these new products compared to what the average, even industry like prosumer, I guess you would call it, someone who is following the industry really heavily, is going to be able to get from taking a look at these new products. So even while I was there, I was still watching the TFB Showtime videos to see a more informed approach to these new products compared to what I was able to glean just by picking them up and looking at them and, getting some hands-on with them myself. It's not really a comparative approach to something that you've got to review, right? So would I go to SHOT Show again? Yes, and that's largely because I'm working on starting my own company. Going just for yourself is kind of a moot point unless you have those industry connections, those inter-industry connections, with people that can get you into like the 511 party, the CRY party, the Global Ordnance Party. Unless you can get into those industry parties and invite, going there to like hang out with people, you're not really going to do a whole lot of that. Going there to network and build business connections is something that's really good. And then going there to see the new things isn't really worthwhile, in my opinion. I mean, sure, you get your hands on them, but like I said, you get a more informed approach from something like TFB TV Showtime. So I think for the average person, myself included, going to SHOT Show is something that's kind of more of a dream than something that's going to be a realistic approach and something that's going to be worthwhile in the long run. If you go and you go for the right reasons, I think it's a really valuable show. But if you're going just because it's the cool thing and everybody wants to go to SHOT Show, that you're kind of going for the wrong reasons. So that's my review of SHOT Show. Go ahead and follow, like, subscribe. There's going to be a lot of good videos coming out soon, so peace out.